Hello everyone, this is Tom from TutorBros. In this video we're going to learn how to solve quadratic equations by completing the square. This method works best when the two following conditions are met. When the coefficient of the squared term a is equal to 1, and when the coefficient of the linear term b is even. So a would be 1 and b is even. Now you can use this method in other circumstances, but if given the choice, I would recommend using it only when those two conditions are met. So the basic idea in using this method is to create an equation with the square of a binomial so that we can easily isolate for x. So let's see how that's done. I will copy number 1 down here. So we have x squared minus 8x plus 15 is equal to 0. Alrighty, now the first step would be to move the constant term to the other side of the equation, get it by itself. So in this case, we would just have to subtract 15 on both sides. Then we would have x squared minus 8x equals negative 15. Then we want to complete the square on the other side of the equation by finding out what constant term gives us a perfect square trinomial. So to do that, we look at the coefficient of the linear term. In this case, that would be 8. We divide it by 2, and then we square it. So if we divide 8 by 2, we get 4. If we square it, we get 16. So we're going to add 16 to the left-hand side of the equation. So now we have x squared minus 8x plus 16. But remember that if we do something to one side of an equation, we have to do the same thing to the other side of the equation. So we're also going to have to add 16 on the right-hand side. So if we add 16 to negative 15, that leaves us with just positive 1. So now our new equation is x squared minus 8x plus 16 equals 1. All right, now we know that on the left-hand side of the equation, we have a perfect square trinomial. So we can rewrite it as the square of a binomial. And then to do that, we just condense this into x minus, and then it would be the linear term, or the coefficient of the linear term, divided by 2. So again, we just divided by 2. So it's x minus 4 raised to the second power. So all we did was condense the perfect square trinomial into the square of a binomial. So x minus 4 squared is equal to 1. And then in order to isolate for x, we want to take the square root of both sides of this equation. So we take the square root of x minus 4 squared and the square root of 1. So the square root of x minus 4 squared would just be x minus 4, no squared anymore. And the square root of 1 is 1, but it's also negative 1, because if we square a negative, we would get a positive. So the square root of 1 can be plus or minus 1. Now, what we can do here in order to solve for x is set up two different equations, namely x minus 4 is equal to 1, and x minus 4 is equal to negative 1. And then we can just solve for x in both of these equations. So if x minus 4 is positive 1, then x would be equal to 5. And if x minus 4 is negative 1, then x would be equal to 3. We simply add 4 to both sides of the equation in both cases. So these would be our two answers to the first quadratic equation, x equals 5 and x equals 3. Okay, let's try, we'll just do one more. Ready? So we'll do number 2 here. So we have x squared equals 27 minus 6x. Now remember, the first step would be to isolate for the constant term. So all we would have to do in order to make that happen here would just be to add 6x to both sides of the equation. So now we would have x squared plus 6x equals 27. So constant's now by itself. Okay, then we do the same as before, where we create a perfect square trinomial on the left-hand side of the equation. So we take the coefficient of the linear term as 6, divide it by 2 to get 3, and square it to get 9. So we add 9 to both sides of the equation. X squared plus 6x plus 9. And then if we add 9 to the right-hand side, that's 27 plus 9, which is 36. Alrighty? Then we write the perfect square trinomial as the square of a binomial. So we can condense that into x, and then in this case it would be plus. And then we take the coefficient of the linear term again, 6, divide by 2, and that would be 3. And then we just raise that to the second power. And that's still going to be equal to 36. Right? Then we take the square root of both sides of the equation. So the square root of x plus 3 squared would just be x plus 3. And the square root of 36 would be positive 6 and negative 6. All right. Now we can create our two equations again in order to solve for x. So we can say x plus 3 is equal to the positive square root, positive 6, or x plus 3 is equal to the negative square root, negative 6. And then we just subtract 3 on both sides of the equation. So in this case, x would be equal to 3. And in the second case, x would be equal to negative 9. So the solutions to the second quadratic equation would be x equals 3 and x equals negative 9.